from many of you. I come from marketing, but I do think the more I thought about this, the more I thought, yeah, there's some really interesting things there that hopefully we can share, and that I can bring you in terms of my thinking. So I went back, I kept seeing the emails from Vlad and Wendy about the possible and possibilities, and I kind of had a sense of what it was about, but as I was preparing for today, I thought, okay, well, I'd better get the official definition of what possible is about. So I went to the website. Thank you for having such a great website. And here's what I cut and pasted from the website. The possible is those features, processes, and events that can come into being and transform what already exists. And this transform, I think, is what we're going to be talking about here. And so it's about the here and now, becoming the elsewhere, the not yet here, and so on, through anticipation, imagination, and creativity. And then it's about individuals and communities thinking, feeling, and acting in the present to build the future. And so I started to think about these different elements, transforming what is already here, and then thinking, feeling, and acting in the present to build the future. And I realized that's what we, in economics and business schools and so on, call producing and consuming, right? So that's kind of my departure point. So this was reassuring. It made me feel like, okay, well, maybe I have something to talk about here. So this idea of producing and consuming the possible. So there's something that we use, and so the idea is, what is it that motivates us consumers or producers, to come up with the possible? And there's something that's very useful that we use in marketing, which is something called jobs to be done. It's a slightly, sort of cumbersome expression. It's a bit of a pain to deal with. We end up calling them JTBDs. But it's a useful notion. It was used first by a famous Harvard Business School professor, Clay Christensen, who's a guy who did a lot of work on innovation. And he basically says consumers are driven to act by their jobs to be done. And those jobs range from the functional to the social, the cultural, and the emotional. And you can see from the pictures I have here, a couple, comes together and they want to, start a family. And so in order to get that job done, to sort of prepare for that possible life together, they start looking at houses. And then, the job to be done then becomes, renovating the house. And the reason I have this picture here with the electric drill is there's a famous marketer, Ted Levitt, also from Harvard Business School, who talked about the fact that consumers don't buy electric drills. What they buy is the hole in the wall. And I would even say, they don't just buy the hole in the wall. What they buy is, the dream of the house in which you can, raise a family, something like that, right? So jobs to be done. And those jobs to be done, again, are what drives consumers, all of us, to act, to do things. And there's an interesting story around this jobs to be done, narrative, which is I call the case of the downsizer apartment. So this guy had been asked, a researcher, scholar, marketing scholar, had been asked to help sell some apartments in a new development that were sort of targeted to senior citizens. And they were having a hard time selling these apartments. They were beautiful apartments. They had all the right, furnishings and everything. And people would come and look at them and say, wow, this is so beautiful, beautiful place. And then they didn't buy them. And so something was getting in the way of people buying these beautiful apartments. And so they decided to do some sort of anthropological, research, which is very popular in marketing these days, ethnography and so on. And so they were listening to people after their visits and realized that one of the things that got in the way is people had these dining room, sets. They had dining tables, big tables in their homes, their large homes. And then when it came to, moving into a small apartment, they thought, well, what are we going to do with the table? And the table, in a way, was a symbol of how are we going to entertain our kids, our families. So what became very clear as a job to be done was, people, were actually looking to transform their lives into something where they could still, have their family. So the idea was the solution had to be some sort of, room where you could have your family over, maybe book it, for, a lunch or dinner when people need them, finding solutions to get that job done of still being a parent and being able to entertain. And that's how they created this new solution, and that became very, very, very popular, and the apartments started selling really well. So the idea there is you listen to consumers with empathy in order to understand their jobs to be done. And that's what I'm calling people first marketing. Put yourself in the consumer's shoes as she gets on with her life. And it's all about empathy, and we talk about empathy a lot in marketing, really, listening to that consumer and feeling her emotions. What solutions does she adopt? What is she talking about to her friends? What is she loving and complaining about? And we do a lot of, social listening, obviously, on social media and blogs and so on. What is she returning or reordering through e-commerce? And then from all of this sort of listening and empathy, you can infer a job to be done. And getting to that job to be done, as we've seen with the example of the apartments, is something that's absolutely critical. And I was thinking about this, and I realized, hey, the COVID crisis has really made this even more more compelling an argument. And I came, sort of the phrase that came to me is necessity is the mother of invention. So here's someone, and I'm sure most of us have even more specific examples, someone who used their ironing board as their table in order to be able to work from home. And I think, we've all had these jobs over the last 18 months, jobs to be done, that we found incredibly creative solutions for. And so there's this very strong, sort of driver of action and transformation there, that consumers can bring to, the creation of the possible. Vlad and I and a bunch of other people wrote a paper several years ago. Boy, it was 7 years ago, Vlad, on consumer creativity and online forums. And one of the things we talk about there is that consumption is a process of resource integration. Consumers access, adapt, and integrate their own resources, their knowledge of their own, job to be done, their money, their time, material objects, relationships, emotions, and so on and so forth, and they integrate them with external resources, products that are out there in the market, services, information, and so on and so forth, in order to craft solutions to get their jobs done. So we're driven by the job to be done, and we're crafting a solution. And so that's a very creative process that involves the, not internationalization, but the internalization. Sorry, I should have proofread that. And externalization of possible solutions. And that's of course, Vlad's work. Every act of consumption, we argued, consists of a new creative act that is specific to the given job and to its context. And in that way, the possible is created and recreated again and again. And in that way also, I'm arguing now, production and consumption are inextricably intertwined. Interestingly, that's where a lot of the scholarly work in marketing is going right now. This is a 2013 article by a guy named Niraj Dawar at, I think he's at the University of Toronto. And this is, for those of you who have a knowledge of these things, this is a value chain. When we think about value chains in business, there's the upstream, which is where things are manufactured, right? Where you take raw ingredients and put them through some sort of a plant, a unit of production. And then the downstream is as you come closer to the consumer. And Taillard in 2013 argued that more and more the downstream activities is where value is created. So value is actually created at that point of intersection between the consumer and the brand or the product or the service. So it's really at that point of consumption that everything happens, right? And he calls it a tilt from the upstream to the downstream. So this is very, very much where marketers right now and marketing scholars are thinking that most of the value, meaning the possible value, the potential value, is created at the point of consumption. And so co-creation, or that sort of coming together of consumption and production, to me is what opens up the possible. And I just put in some pictures here to try to illustrate some of the possible that has developed as a result of this co-creative work, this consumption meets production. And on the top left, you see tourists in Paris. Well, we all know that without the Airbnbs of the world and the Ubers of the world, people would not be traveling as much as they are. I mean, obviously, this came to a very, very quick halt during the pandemic, but it will come back. And it's actually this sort of Airbnb or Uberization, as some people call it, of travel, has created some problems. We know that Barcelona and other cities have become sort of almost overwhelmed with tourists. But that's something that's opened up a whole new possible in terms of allowing people to visit the world, to discover the world. Top right is a woman in Guatemala, who's creating beautiful things and selling them on Etsy. Again, co-creation, right? Opening up, ways for artisans around the world to sell their craft and to make a living. And the one in the middle, bottom a picture, is a very, very interesting example. It's a platform that I'm currently doing some fair bit of research on, called Pinduoduo. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It's a Chinese platform that is completely revolutionizing the way small Chinese farmers, subsistence, I'm not saying this right, farmers are able to get their produce out to consumers, and it's really having a huge impact on the Chinese agriculture and the economy there. So opening up the possible. So what I've argued here, just to summarize and conclude, is this notion that consumer jobs to be done are driving creativity. That creativity, in a way, is helping transform, what's being consumed and produced, and creating a new possible. That's pretty much, in a nutshell, what the argument is, and hopefully it is useful to those of you who are probably more immersed in this whole possibility study realm than I am, but I do find it quite compelling.